We're reading the portion of the life of Sarah this week. In a couple of weeks, we're going to see how her grandchildren, great-grandchildren, were led down into Egypt. A few weeks after that, we're going to be experiencing the first Pesach. A few weeks after that, we're going to have the Sinai experience again. And where Moses receives the visions of the Mishkan, and we learn about a young man named Bezalel. And this young man was very talented. And I hesitate to compare, because I think he would resist me comparing him to Bezalel, because I know it's not just a divine revelation that Hillel knows what he knows, because it's taken a lot of hard work, a lot of internship, a lot of down on your hands and knees digging and sifting and dirty work. And but he is a very intelligent young man, and I'm glad to know him. While we were in Israel, we went out past his neighborhood into a place where an ancient community was, and in recent times it had been used for some construction dumping, but he showed us how to dig, and we find shards of pottery, and we'd show it to him. He said, "Yeah, this is from First Temple period." Show him another piece. This is from Second Temple period. He said, "Well, this one's more modern, and this one's." He'd just tell us just by looking at the pieces of pottery. And I thought, I'm going to find a good piece here. So I reached down and I picked up one, and I asked him, "Well, what's this one?" He said, "That's a roofing tile." But I know he has had a lot of hard work and getting to where he is, and I think he's got a lot to share with us. He's dug a lot, and now I'd ask him to come and dig in us and get us to see what you know and see what you can find in us. Thank you.
So, good evening, y'all. See some new faces here, some faces I've known for many years. Doctor, colleagues. Anyway, thank you very much for coming here. It's great to be here. Great to be in Texas for the first time. I learned a lot of things about Texas, but most of it was vicarious. I was never really in Texas before. And one thing I learned is that there ain't no such thing as too much ammo. There's only two times when you can have too much ammo on your person: if you're drowning or on fire. So what I have here tonight is ammo. And I have a lot of it, and I might not be able to spend all of it, but we'll do what we can. And the ammo is evidence. Evidence that we have, that I've compiled, which is out there. Any one of you can get out there, Google it, go to the library. It's out there, but I've compiled it as best as I can to show and to answer all our naysayers who dare claim that the Jewish temple never stood on the Temple Mount. So here we go. By the way, I'll be giving another talk about the sifting project, and they kind of overlap. There are certain artifacts that were found in the sifting project which definitely have to do with the temple, but I'm not going to be showing them tonight so that we don't take the wind out of the sails. Okay, here we go. Now, can anybody recognize this quote? Okay. So the reason I'm bringing this quote tonight is because many of us have heard of Holocaust denial, but temple denial, not everybody heard of it, and in many cases it's worse. In many ways it's worse because there's nobody alive today who saw the temple. There are still people with numbers on their arms that were in the camps and can tell the tale, but nobody alive today saw the temple. It's also worse because the Jewish temple is the most central part of the Jewish people, That's why we have this quote here. I want to familiarize with this term. Does anybody here speak Arabic? Shlomo? المزعوم. Phlegm. المزعوم. Okay. المزعوم is a term which has been used in recent years to when mentioning the temple, and what it means is the alleged temple of the Jews, as you can see. So just a quick explanation. Temple denial, the claim that the Holy Temple never existed in Jerusalem. In other words, not necessarily claiming that there wasn't a Jewish temple, but it wasn't in Jerusalem, it was somewhere else. Here we have some quotes. Here's one, in Yemen. That's pretty far away. Nablus, nice place. That's even better. Familiar? Good-looking man. Here we have some beautiful quotes, some more beautiful quotes. I guess you can read them. I don't have to read them. Can everybody see? Okay, so let me read it. It became clear to us that the Jewish belief concerning the temple is nothing but a false claim that does not stand the test of scientific scrutiny. Abed el-Taub Mustafa, Cairo University. Here's another one. The myth of the false temple is the worst crime of forgery in history. Abdel Rahim Rahan Barakat, Egyptian archaeologist. Here we have some more. I'm not going to read all of them, but you can see the pretty faces. Most of the quotes you'll notice, are of recent years, the past 20, 25 years. We have one from the 70s here, a guy with the thing on his head. But these are beautiful quotes, and all claiming that the Jewish temple is nothing but a lie. Part of this overlaps with what we call the Al-Aqsa is in danger libel. Not only was it not a Jewish temple, but anytime Jews try to get even near the Temple Mount by excavations, there have been bloody riots that have broken out. You might remember 1996 and other riots, and you can see these beautiful cartoons, which are very reminiscent of the 1930s in Germany and Europe. Here we have some more beautiful cartoons, just to show you a little bit of the anti-Semitism, which is part of this temple denial. Al-Aqsa is in danger. Well, we don't store rocks in Al-Aqsa and throw them at cops. So I don't know who's putting Al-Aqsa in danger, but that's just a thought. Okay, so this is a quote. I forgot where I took it from, but it's true. So temple denial has become a central tenet of Palestinian nationalism, and in fact is aimed at undermining the Jewish claim to any part of the land. This slowly is trickled down to the media, to Western media. And here we have a quote from the New York Times, October 2015. Underlined is, the question which many books and scholarly treatises have never definitely answered is whether the 37-acre site home to Islam's sacred Dome of the Rock shrine, and I'm not going to read the rest of it, but underlined, have never definitely answered. Okay, so the alleged temple. We're not going to get too much into UNESCO. Trump took care of them. But anyhow, it's actually a really important organization, believe it or not. I don't want to just stand here and badmouth them. They do beautiful things all over the world, preserving the heritage, but for some reason, whenever it comes to Israel, they turn to Frankenstein, and everything is against us. That's because there are Arabs within the organization that have hijacked the organization and forced it to come up with all these ridiculous resolutions. But we're not going to give them the time. We're not going to even talk about them, so bye. Okay. Temple proof. Now, why do we have this water here? You've probably heard Barkley, Professor Gabi Barkley, when asked, prove to me that there's a temple. So what's his answer? Do I have to prove to you that water is wet? Do I have to prove to you that the sky is blue? 1 + 1 = 2? It's a wrap. But it's really ridiculous, the notion that we have to prove there was a temple, and we really don't have to. We don't have to apologize for anything. But it does make an interesting topic of just discussion and learning to actually go and look at what we have, what relics do we have, what proof do we have for the temple. So first of all, the Muslims are the ones who actually have preserved the tradition of the temple, and they've done it beautifully, till mostly about 20, 30 years ago. And here it is, the Dome of the Rock. Where was it built? Right upon the foundation stone, which is the rocky outcrop, the summit of Mount Moriah, and they didn't build it there for no reason. By the way, this is not a mosque. I'm sure you all know that. The reason they built it there is because that's where the temples stood. Okay, I'm not going to go into all the history of the Muslims, but this is the precise location where the temple stood, and they built this dome, again, not a mosque, because that's where the temple was, and they preserved that tradition. We're not going to get too much into this either, but in early Islamic times, we have many references to and allusions to, is that proper English? To the fact that Islam recognizes Solomon's temple and recognizes the place of Solomon's temple on the Temple Mount. You might have heard of Al-Maqdisi. He linked the Al-Aqsa Mosque to Solomon's temple. Abu Bakr al-Watsi, preacher for Jerusalem, and of course Jalaluddin al-Ghumi, who was a Sufi, who defined the construction of the Solomonic house of worship as the building of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Sufim are the ones who spin around. Well, you might want to try that one day. The original direction of prayer in the early days of Islam was towards Jerusalem. Are you familiar with that? You're not familiar with that? Well, it's a long story why, we're not going to get into it, but that was the original direction of prayer for the first decades. One of the names of Jerusalem in the early Islamic period was Bayt al-Maqdis. There was Ilya was one of the names, but Bayt al-Maqdis was another name, and Bayt al-Maqdis is not from Arabic. The word does not exist in Arabic. Bayt al-Maqdis is Bayt HaMikdash, which is Hebrew for the temple, and again, this is what they used to call Jerusalem. Here we have a beautiful, picturesque village in the Hebron Hills, a village called Nuba. This was recently published about a year ago by two colleagues of mine, Asaf Avram and Peretz Reuven. And in this mosque, this is the mihrab, where they pray to, the direction where they pray to. There is a stone with an inscription, and judging by the style of the letters, it has to be at least 1,000 years old, and that's because the letters are not dated. It's probably from the Abbasid or Fatimid periods. And on it says, the stone, of course, is in secondary use, but the stone is from the original mosque that was there earlier. And this is a waqf, an endowment to Sakhrat Bayt al-Maqdis and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Sakhrat Bayt al-Maqdis. Sakhrat in Arabic is stone. They're alluding to the Dome of the Rock, and they're calling it the stone of the temple. Doesn't get any better than that. The Muslims preserved the tradition and location of the temple like we said, up until the 20th century, including the early to mid 20th century, where they wrote on their guidebook, I'm sure you're all familiar with that, that's the location of the temple. And again, most of the change came after 1967, and more than that in the 1990s, when we had the peace accords. The original name for the entire Temple Mount enclosure, again, up until recently, was Haram el-Sharif, the noble sanctuary. And today, the whole entire structure is called Al-Aqsa. They are slowly taking over, and everything is Al-Aqsa. It's not only the mosque that was in the south, but it's everything. And here we have the new brochures, Al-Aqsa Mosque, clarification for misconceptions. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. We see the change, the same waqf that printed the earlier ones, showing that that's the place of the temple, and now claim that it's the Dome of the Rock and not the Holy of Holies, Al-Aqsa Mosque and not the temple, Al-Buraq wall and not the Wailing wall. Al-Buraq was the magical mare that Muhammad rid upon, and we're not going to get into that. Not tonight. So the first thing we're going to talk about, now we get to the proof, our historical proof, which is the most basic proof. History is history. What was, and you can't change that. So we have, first of all, the Tanakh, the Bible, which up until today tells us more than anything about antiquity, because we don't have many other written words in that time. Which, of course, 1 Kings, 2 Chronicles tells the story of the building of the temple by Solomon. We have the continuous line of tradition throughout the ages which preserved the temple's existence and location. Again, even though the Jews were exiled, there was constantly a population of Jews in the land of Israel, and they preserved the location of the temple. Not only Jews, by the way, Christians as well, and like we said, Muslims. The writings of Chazal, the Mishnah, the Tosefta, the Talmud, the Midrash, all talk about the place of the temple, especially, of course, Masechet Yoma. Historians who lived during the time of the temple, I'm sure you're all familiar with Josephus, who was alive and saw the temple with his own eyes, saw the destruction, and we learn a lot from him. He's the main source during the Second Temple period. That's Josephus. Actually, some say that it's not Josephus, it's just an anti-Semitic because of the nose. But that's what I heard recently. It's not Josephus, it's just because of the nose they claim that it's Josephus. We have pagan historians who had nothing to do, no reason to say anything about the temple, but yet they mentioned the temple. They had no religious or any other reason to talk about it, but they talked about the temple, and that's the second temple. We even have some historians who refer to the first temple of Solomon. So now we're going to talk about the archaeological evidence. Okay? I have a little, watch this. Okay, archaeological evidence. But before we proceed, we have to remember a few things. Both Jewish temples were completely destroyed. This is according to was pre-told in the prophecies, and we know the story. They were completely destroyed, so it's going to be a little bit hard for us to find any evidence for the first and second temples. This is very important. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to forbid any excavation, and on the other hand, say that there was never a temple. That's not fair. And the Muslims destroyed many artifacts, some on purpose, some just being dumb. But we're going to talk about that Saturday night. That's one of the parallels between the overlaps between this talk and the other talk. But first, we're going to go to archaeological evidence of the second temple. There are many remains of the second temple, the Temple Mount from that period. And that's why we're going to first go here. Well, where's the evidence? It's right in your face. Have you been to the Western Wall? Have you been to the Western Wall? Excellent. Next time, go on top. So anyhow, the Western Wall is just a small little portion. Of a retaining wall put up by King Herod the Great in the 1st century BCE in order to expand the entire plaza and basically refurbish the entire temple. And the wall stands till today. And here, this is the way the wall looked during the Second Temple period, and this is the Temple Mount during the Second Temple period. Not very different, as you can see. Again, it's right in your face. So here we have the phases, the several phases. This is from Lean Rittmeyer, by the way. Very important book to read, The Quest. Most of what I'm saying can be found there. And here we have the phases. We have the inner yellow cream color, which is the 500 cubit Temple Mount from the first temple period. We have an extension to the south in orange, which is the Hashmonean from the 2nd century BCE. And all the gray is Herod's work. You can see to the north, to the west, and to the south is all the expansion that we see today, again, part of the temple. Here we see the phases, first temple, second temple, and today. So a quote from Josephus, he talks about that there were 4 gates in the western side of the Temple Mount. And actually, we still have the remnants of these gates until today, and you can see them if you go to Jerusalem. There we have the 4 gates. The first gate is called Warren's Gate. The bridge that you see afterwards is called Wilson's Arch. The next one over is Barkley's Gate, and you can see the staircase to the south. That is Robinson's Arch. And they all can be seen today, and you're welcome to go to Jerusalem. So Warren's Gate. There's Warren's Gate. Wilson's Arch. This was a bridge which led from the upper city in the western hill into the temple. Here's Wilson's Arch. There are certain phases that might be a little bit later. The archaeologists are actually working on it as we speak, trying to distinguish between the various phases. Actually, where I work, we receive material from this excavation, and we're helping them do the work. And now I'm going to take something to drink. Barkley's Gate, this is in the women's, how do you say Zlat Nashim? Section. The women's section in today's western wall. You can see the lintel, okay, the lintel of the gate, of Barkley's Gate. And there are 2 pictures here showing it. Maybe I'll point it out. And here we have Robinson's Arch. Of course, this is probably the most familiar feature that we can all recognize. During the Second Temple period, there was a staircase leading above the street, which was underneath the Temple Mount, directly to the southern corner of the Temple Mount. And we can see the remains of the arch today. Here's another look at it. And here's another 3-dimensional reconstruction of it. This is on the street itself. You can see the arch. And another important thing, and this is one of the most well-preserved Herodian parts of the Temple Mount that are still visible today. One of the most elaborate examples of Herodian masonry, which is preserved from the Second Temple period. And this is what's called the Hulda Gates in the southern corner of the Temple Mount. The gate, parts of the gate itself, the entrance, are preserved, as well as an elaborate staircase with domed ceilings, which are carved in beautiful, state-of-the-art Roman Herodian-style architecture. You can see them till today. This, by the way, was declared as a mosque by the Muslims in the late 90s. You see the ceiling here. You see this beautiful carving on the ceiling. Here we have the entrance. So this is the entrance to the Hulda Gates. First, we're going to look at the entrance. You can see how it would have looked during the Second Temple period and how it looks today. The building on the left is the Crusader Building, which was built against the southern wall of the Temple Mount. And you see a small projection right where that arrow is. That's a Umayyad gate that was added up, but right above it you can see a relieving arch and a lintel. A relieving arch relieving the pressure from the arch, and a lintel of this entrance, this gate, one of two gates of the Hulda gates leading into the tunnels. Here again we have another better depiction of it. You can see where the blue arrow, the relieving arch, and right underneath it you can see a long rectangular piece of stone, which is the actual lintel of the gate. Look at the left picture and the right picture, and you can get a better idea. Here we have a picture of the way it looked during the Second Temple period. You can see the beautiful domed ceilings, the pillars with the columns. And here we can see, this is taken, I think, in the 19th century. You can't really see it today because they were covered off. But this is the actual pillar, which, again, exists till today from the Second Temple period. Here's the ceiling. The ceiling, again, still visible today. One of the most well-preserved Herodian pieces of architecture still available. This is the exit from the Hulda gates. You can see behind it the royal stoa, the royal stoa or basilica, which was one of the most beautiful features of Herod's Temple Mount. Again, in the southern part of the Temple Mount. Here we have a section of it, three columns of pillars, and beautiful architecture with Corinthian columns. I think 162 pillars altogether. Here we have okay, and this is what Josephus says about this structure. And it was the structure more noteworthy than any under the sun. Well, right after the 6-Day War, when the area surrounding the Temple Mount was available for excavations begun by Professor Binyamin Mazar, who was a world-renowned archaeologist, one of the top biblical archaeologists in Israel at the time. And they started digging in the south of the Temple Mount, and lo and behold, they discovered rubble, which collapsed during the destruction of the Second Temple. And among this rubble were huge pieces of architecture from this structure, the royal stoa. I saw some of this with my own eyes. Some of it is actually on display, but I was in the cellar where these are kept prior to publication. They're being published as we speak, at least some of them. And here are these pieces. Again, beautiful, elaborate cut limestone in typical Herodian style. These were found right at the foot of the Temple Mount. This one is a beautiful piece, which is located in the president's house, so everybody can see. Here we come to the next artifact, which I'm sure you all heard of. Did everybody hear of this? Huh? Nobody heard of this? Exactly. So we have a Hebrew inscription on a huge piece of stone. This piece of stone was the top of a railing, which was right near the stoa, west of the stoa, right near Robinson's Arch. Excuse me. And on it we have an inscription which says lebet hatkiah velehach, or lehav. Okay, bet hatkiah, the trumpeting place, and lechriz, which is to announce, or lavdir, which is to distinguish. Josephus talks about a place where they used to stand and blow the trumpets, and also the Mishnah talks about it when Shabbos would enter and when Shabbos would be over. Right over there. Here's the quote from Josephus. You may read it. And here we have on the left, courtesy of the Temple Institute, and on the right, a reconstruction of how it would have looked during the Second Temple period. Again, Josephus. And we come to the next artifact. How are we doing? Okay, this is the famous Sorag inscription. The Sorag was a short fence which was to prevent any Gentile from approaching the area that they were forbidden of approaching. It is written in Greek. It was found in 1871 by Charles Clamon Ganon, and it is of course, in the Museum of Istanbul in Turkey. Here we have a quote from Midot, which talks about this structure. It was custom to bow down whenever you would reach the breaches which were breached in this wall by the Greek Hellenistic kings. Here we have the commandments, which are the reason for this barrier. You may read them. When the tabernacle is set out, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle to be pitched, the Levites shall set it up. And if any outsider comes near, he shall be put to death. So you shall appoint Aaron and his sons that they may keep their priesthood, but the layman who comes near shall be put to death. So this is a very serious issue. And there were warnings to prevent anybody, any Gentile, from getting near the parts where they're not allowed to go in. Here we have a nice depiction of it with the actual stone on top with the inscription, courtesy of the Temple Institute. And this is what the inscription actually says in Greek. No Gentile may enter within the railing around the sanctuary and within the enclosure. Whosoever should be caught will render himself liable to death by penalty, which will inevitably follow. This is from Josephus. He quotes Titus when he lays siege on Jerusalem, talking about this very inscription. Was it not you who inserted the engraved steles, proclaiming that no one must cross this parapet? Did we not permit you to put to death those who crossed it? Okay, we have a historical reference and we have an archaeological artifact. It doesn't get any better than that. This is a mikvah, a bath for purifying. What do you call it now? Okay, a ritual purification bath. And this one is just south of the Temple Mount. It is a very large one. There are many, many of these mikvot all around the Temple Mount. Now, this is a very, very important part of going into the temple, purifying oneself before entering. If there was never a Jewish temple, how come the whole area is riddled with these mikvot all around the Temple Mount? These are west of the Temple Mount. The one on the right was recently published, right near Wilson's Arch. Very, very large public mikvah in order to enable the pilgrims who would come, the thousands of pilgrims who would come during the festivals to prepare for entering the Temple Mount. This is a very special mikvah. This one is on the Temple Mount, right underneath Al-Aqsa Mosque. It was documented by the British in the late 1930s, early 40s, after the earthquake that destroyed much of Al-Aqsa Mosque. This was published by Hamilton, who was the archaeologist in charge of the British Mandate. Here we have another very, very large ritual bath right by the Ophel, which is a little bit more south, but right near the Temple Mount. And you may be familiar with this one. This is the Silla Wan Pool at the foot of the city of David. Well, the Silla Wan Pool, other than being a water source and a place where they would take the libation waters, was also, according to many scholars, one of these ritual baths. Now, the Silla Wan Pool led up with a walkway, a stepped a stepped street all the way from the Silla Wan Pool to the Temple Mount, ascending the hill of the city of David. Here we have another depiction of it. Again, all the way to the foot of the Temple Mount. This street has been excavated in the past few years. It is still being excavated. The guy in the bottom is a friend of mine. He's starting his PhD now. And here we see the beautiful, huge steps of this Second Temple period street. The broken steps on the right are because... I'm good. Oh, okay, thank you. The broken steps on the right are because, this is also mentioned by Josephus, by the way, when the Romans... You can't see me? Sorry. Cut that out. When the Romans came to Jerusalem and breached the walls, so many Jews hid underneath the stairs. And the Romans, of course, broke the stairs to get them out and killed them. Underneath the stairs, just like in any street, was what? Sewage. Sewage, you're right. This sewage has also been excavated by Eli Shukron, another friend of mine. And here we have a nice depiction on the left. You can see the street and you can see the drainage system beneath it. So like we said, this street will lead directly underneath Robinson's Arch, underneath the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount. And right underneath the area of Robinson's Arch were many interesting artifacts that were removed from the sewage, from this water channel. One of them is this. It is a token, a fired piece of clay with a Hebrew inscription on it, which is written in Aramaic. It reads, Dacha Leya, pure for God. Another reading of it by other scholars is Dichra Aleph LeYehoyariv. These are all Aramaic. Dichra Aleph LeYehoyariv means a ram, day, Sunday, LeYehoyariv, which is very important, a family of priests who took part in the temple. Anyhow, what this item, never mind exactly what it says on it, because the scholars are not 100% sure, it is 100% a token from the actual administration of the Second Temple. I just happened to find it. So that was published in 2011. Here we have a quote from the Mishnah. There were 4 tokens of the temple, and one of them were inscribed calf, ram, kid, and sinner, which were issued as a receipt to those who deposited the appropriate funds. Ben Azai says there were 5, and they were inscribed in Aramaic. Again, we have the text, we have the archaeological evidence, doesn't get better than that. Here's another part from this Mishnah. And here we have beautiful jewelry inspired by this artifact, which was made by the city of David. I bought my wife the silver earrings. And here we have the golden bell, again, found in the same area. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. The golden bell, where the beautiful golden bell, which actually made a sound. And we know the priestly garments, the golden garments had 72, I think, 72 bells. That's from Exodus, I think. And there's no better explanation. Again, this was found in the sewage channel right near the Temple Mount than the bell of the priestly garments. If anybody can think of another explanation, I'm open to hearing it. By the way, there was an X-ray done on this bell. By the way, this doesn't leave this room, okay, because it wasn't published. There was an X-ray done on this bell. I just know the archaeologist. There was an X-ray done on this bell, and inside it, how do you say inbal? The tongue is in the shape of a pomegranate. So I just spilled the beans. And again, we have beautiful jewelry inspired by this artifact made by the city of David. Okay, continuing on. Are you familiar with this coin? Okay, so it's not a shekel. This is a coin called Judea Capta. Judah is surrendered. These were coins minted by the Romans after the destruction of the temple, but there was no temple. One of them was by Vespasian, the other one was by Titus. They were minted for several years, and you can see the rulers on the left, and on the right you can see the date tree. The date tree is a symbol of Judah, of the land of Judah. And on the right you can see a captured woman, which represents Judah, and a towering soldier, which represents, of course, Rome. These were minted again by the Romans. And the Romans didn't stop there. We've all heard of the Arch of Titus, which is in the old city of Rome, which depicts a triumph of Roman soldiers returning with the spoils of the temple, but there was no temple. And here we have it in color. This was recently published as well. They found traces of color on the arch, and this was how it originally looked. This is a reconstruction of how it would have looked before the color faded off. We can see the trumpets, which the Temple Mount was inspired by the way they were set up. That's probably, by the way, the Shulchan HaZahav. What? Showbread? Okay. And here we have, of course, the menorah. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, the menorah is one of the most important symbols of the Jewish people after the destruction of the temple. And the Romans made sure to depict this. You can see it being taken away here, and this is a very, very important Jewish symbol. The examples that I'm showing you here are from the times when the Second Temple still stood. So the example on the left is well known. It is from the Upper City, the Jewish quarter of today, and it is a carving on stucco, on plaster of the menorah, the seven-branch menorah. And on the right is the altar. We see on the right a coin of Matintiahu Antigonos, who was the last ruler of the Hashmonean dynasty. Again, a menorah. This is during the Second Temple period. And on the bottom, we have the 10 agorot Israeli coin, which it was inspired by that coin on the top. On the bottom right is another artifact from the drainage channel underneath the Temple Mount. This is a carving of a menorah, perhaps done by a child. That's what the archaeologists were thinking, and that's just because of the rather schematic way it was done. These are depictions of the menorah after the destruction of the temple. Again, it continues to be a very important Jewish symbol. The one on the left is from up north, the one on the right as well. And the bottom is the bread stamp from the Byzantine period, again with the menorah. And this is a treasure that many of you have probably heard of, which was found just south of the Temple Mount, and it dates to the Byzantine period. This is a golden Torah scroll belt, which holds the Torah scroll together, and on it has the menorah, the shofar, and a Torah scroll. It was found by Eilat Mazar, who is the granddaughter of Binyamin Mazar, who we mentioned earlier. And of course, today it is the symbol of the state of Israel. And recently, Israel gave a present to UNESCO, a small replica of the menorah on Titus's arch. Okay. Are we good? Here on the left we have an ossuary. So during the Second Temple period, it was custom to first bury the body, then collect the bones and put them into a small little box called an ossuary. These were found in burial caves. They were family burial caves, which the whole family would be buried in. And very often these are just plain boxes, but sometimes these boxes are elaborately decorated with beautiful decorations. And other times there are actually inscriptions on them mentioning the deceased. There's one from Givat HaMivtar, in northern Jerusalem, which was found. This, I think, is in the Israel Museum today. And on it, it says in Aramaic, Samon Bana Hachala. That's Aramaic for Simon, builder of the sanctuary or the hall. Okay, so we have somebody who, Herod, by the way, had thousands of people working for him to renovate the Second Temple. And this perhaps was somebody who took part in this work and was very proud of it, and that's what he wanted to be written on his ossuary. So that's some evidence there. This is on Mount Scopus, a very, very famous burial on Mount Scopus, which has written on it, bones of the family of Nicanor of Alexandria, who made the gates. The gates to the court of the Israelites. Very famous gates, which are mentioned. The story is mentioned in the Talmud. There's a whole story about it. If you want, you can go to my father later, and he'll tell you about it. But we have several references to this individual who donated the money for the gates of the temple that never existed. Here we have Bacala Coins. You can see one of the silver one on the right, which has the trumpets. But the best coin of all is this one, which is a silver coin. Again, the Bar Kokhba revolt was less than 100 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. And on it we have the sanctuary, the actual temple. Again, many people alive during the Bar Kokhba revolt actually saw the temple with their eyes. And here's a depiction of it. Okay. Do we have archaeological evidence for Solomon's temple? Is that possible? I don't know. Let's see. Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the house as the high places of the forest. So that's from the prophet Micah. So it's going to be a little hard to find any evidence. But first we'll start with some indirect evidence. And this is the Ophel. This is the Ophel, which is the highest point after the city of David and before the Temple Mount. This was a very important administrative area of the kingdom of Judah. That's Eilat Mazar. She found a wall there which dates to the time of King Solomon. So we're getting very close here. And in her excavation, she found this seal impression with an official impression mentioning King Hezekiah himself. This was published about 2 years ago, I think. I'm sure you heard of it. And on it says, Chizkiyahu Achaz Melech Yehuda. Chizkiyahu, son of Achaz, king of Judah, found several freed from the Temple Mount. The eastern wall of the Temple Mount is the most ancient wall of the Temple Mount. We have several references to this, including Josephus, who basically allude to King Solomon himself building the eastern wall of the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount, as we know, was 500 cubits, and the rest was expanded north, west, and south. And the area around, that on the right is a cubit, and the area around the Golden Gate Here again we have the showing the phases of the Temple Mount, and you can see that the area, the inner core, is the most ancient. So we expect to find in that area some evidence of the most ancient Temple Mount from the first temple period. Here we have this famous seam, which is the seam between the Herodian Temple Mount and the Hashmonean extension. But just north and south of the Golden Gate, we have two courses of stones. The right one 68 feet, the left one 51 feet in length, which are earlier than the Hashmonean masonry. Okay? These are stones that are cut in a rather crude manner, and they don't look anything like Herodian stones. They don't look anything like Hashmonean stones. Here we see pictures of them, and we see the location of them. And they were worked in a different way than later stones. Here another picture. You can see how worn they are. And we have one more location, a little south of there, with several more stones, which you can see the arrows, which are still there today. And these stones, according to several scholars, can't date before the 6th century BCE. Okay, so they can't date before that, which means that this is from the first temple period. So here we have some evidence of the actual Temple Mount from the time of King Solomon. This is a wall that was discovered in the 70s, which may also date to the first temple period. It was later demolished by the Muslims. Here's some photos taken of it. This was after a renovation done by them, again in the early 70s. In 2007, a ditch was dug east and north of the raised platform of the Dome of the Rock. This was to fix an electrical wiring or to install a new one. This was actually supervised by the Israel Antiquity Authority, and in this ditch, I'll show you right now, they found pottery dating to the first temple period on the Temple Mount. To the left, you can see one of the cisterns on the Temple Mount. This cistern was shown by Tzvi Katsuk, who is the archaeologist of the chief archaeologist of the Parks Department of Israel, showed to be very, very similar in morphology to other cisterns which date to the first temple period. This is on the Temple Mount. You can see the location on the right. And this is much larger than other cisterns, which indicate that it's very, very important. What was very, very important on the Temple Mount? I think we all know the answer to that. These are beams, which most of them lie in the area, in the eastern area of the Temple Mount, right near the Golden Gate. And these beams were removed from the Al-Aqsa Mosque after a large earthquake. Here are the beams. And these beams have been on the Temple Mount for a long time. In antiquity, especially in Israel, it's very hard to obtain timber. So you use it over and over again. Some of these beams were dated. Some of these beams were dated and shown to date to the Second Temple period. And one of these beams, actually, this is from Biblical Archaeology Review, actually has a carving on it which might date to the Second Temple period as far as style. Okay, here are some of these beams. So some of these beams were dated, and two of the beams were dated to the First Temple period, and they were made of cedars of Lebanon. Okay? We all know the famous story. Then Hiram gave Solomon cedar and cypress logs according to all of his desire. And Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household and 20 cores of pressed oil. Thus Solomon gave to Hiram year by year. By the way, the Arabs have lately been burning it for heat. So anyway, I want to bless everybody here that, Hiram wasn't Jewish, and some of you aren't either, yet he definitely helped build the temple. So I want to bless all you guys that you may help my dad in doing that. And we'll just end with a quote from the Muslims themselves, from the famous booklet. The site is one of the oldest in the world. Its sanctity dates from the earliest, perhaps from prehistoric times. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. Thank you very much.